Plato is sometimes considered a proto-communist as well as a proto-fascist. How is that possible, and is it in any sense correct? Well, let's start with the proto-communist side. In the Republic, one of Plato's greatest works, although frankly, they're all great, Socrates discusses a just city in speech. In other words, a city that they talk about that is full of justice. In fact, they're discussing the city to try to find what justice is and where it is in a political community. But in the course of that discussion, there's the idea that a just city will have women held in common, and property will not be private, it will be common. So the idea that you're going to have common property and no nuclear family strikes some people as proto-communistic. No private property, no nuclear family, everything held in common, and the extension, in some sense, it would seem, of equality as far and wide as possible. Now, on the other side of the equation, the proto-fascist side, you have in the same book, The Republic, the idea of a philosopher king, of a kind of vertically oriented and extremely hierarchical political community. One with a supremely wise leader at the top, with a kind of caste hierarchy, and it's very clear who's on top and who's on bottom. Moreover, you don't really have a lot of freedom and individual rights and liberties, but you surely don't have the egalitarian world implied by the proto-communist thesis. You have this kind of hierarchy of virtue and excellence. So that strikes some people as fascistic because the all-powerful supreme wise leader, the denigration of equality and individual rights, orientation by some notion of virtue and the good, which means that if I know what's good for you better than you know what's good for you, I can exercise my authority on your behalf. And these sorts of things strike liberal Democrats as possibly fascistic. So it's kind of weird. You have this brilliant author with incredible studies of political life, including the Republic, but not limited to the Republic. And he can be read, quote unquote read, because somehow both of these readings are a little bit lackadaisical. And he's seen as either a communist on one hand or a fascist on the other hand, a proto-communist on one hand or proto-fascist on the other hand. So the challenge for us is to learn to read Plato not through the lens of the history of interpretation that leaves sort of its ideological fingerprints on the book, but just to see, what is Plato trying to teach us? What is he trying to tell us? What is he trying to say? So I'll give you a quick example. The idea of the community of wives and children, or the idea of there being no private property. By the way, community here means nobody has a wife to call his own. Everybody's wife is in common, okay? Because the idea, no private family, no private property, no privacy, nothing that is your own. Now, what is that trying to tell us? Why should that be part of a reflection on the nature of justice in the political community? Well, because among other things, okay, complicated, so we'll just stick to one part of the picture. Among other things, it tells us that there's a fundamental tension in all reflection on justice between love of the common good, the common welfare, the commonwealth, and love of one's own, one's property, one's family, oneself. And so if you're painting a picture where justice, maybe as total concern for the common good, is meant to be depicted, you would drive it to the point of absurdity, where you show how impossible it is and how impractical it is to expect perfect justice from politics. Because what you would need to have perfect justice in politics is the unnatural denigration and limitation of one's love for one's own things, one's own family, one's own self, as I said. So it's like, okay, all right, does that leave us with a proto-communist conclusion? No, it doesn't. Does it leave us with a proto-fascist conclusion? Also, no, it doesn't. It teaches us something about the nature of justice, political community, the nature of the human being's loves, again, love of the common good, love of oneself and one's own. And it raises a fundamental problem for the political community concerning the possibility of justice, the character and nature of justice, and the limits of what can be expected actually, and not just in our imaginary world, with respect to justice. So that's something pretty important. And on the other side of the equation, the fascist, proto-fascist side, well, I was having a conversation with somebody the other day. I think you'll find this interesting. I was saying there should be a mandatory study of Plato. In fact, it's Alexander Dugin's idea, the Platonic minimum. Nobody should be in politics who hasn't read some Plato. But in particular, I was discussing Plato's Laws, an amazing work. And this person said, and I agree, it should be mandatory reading, for all Republicans and conservatives. Yeah, it should be mandatory reading for anybody in politics. But here's the issue. Conservatives who support privacy, free markets, individual liberties, okay, there are conservatives like that, at least in principle. When they see Plato, they see something they don't like. Why? Philosopher King is a certain sort of expert. And it's a stone's throw from the idea of a philosopher king to the idea of a technocrat, somebody who rules by virtue of technical expertise or some sort of knowledge. And the conservatives, they look at the Democrats. This is a simplification, but again, I think it's going to convey the point. And they say, these are technocrats, rule by scientists. That's what we had during COVID. Distrust towards experts means distrust towards all kinds of technocrats and technocracy. So if Plato says that the knowers should be the rulers, and if our version of that claim is technocratic, but if our experts are always on the wrong side of the key questions and they seem to be exercising a certain sort of tyranny over the people, then clearly a conservative who values freedom, free choice, personal rights and liberties, personal responsibility, and all of that is going to look at Plato with a lot of suspicion. And it's true that in Plato's political philosophy, there's a limited scope for freedom because freedom is not taken as the ultimate goal. Virtue or excellence is, which is a long conversation in and of itself. But we'd also have to think through, is what Plato means by the philosopher and by the rule of the knowers, or at least the seekers for knowledge, equivalent to today's version of the technocrat, of the expert who really is just an expert in a very limited domain, whose expertise in that limited domain does not give him the broad, comprehensive knowledge of a legislator or a statesman, all the more so of a founder, political founder, and who therefore distorts political life through this kind of comic exaggeration of his limited area of technical expertise. Like, oh, I'm a medical doctor, therefore I know what's good for society overall. I have some expertise in computing systems, therefore I know what's good for society overall. My limited area of expertise qualifies me to rule over everybody in an unlimited manner. That's kind of the criticism against modern technocrats, isn't it? Well, that's foreign to the spirit of what Plato's talking about when he discusses the philosopher king. And in Plato, there is a lot of material that reflects on the limitations of very specific domains of knowledge when they have the pretension to universalize themselves or generalize themselves and to want to become rulers over other people. So I would say in summary that at a very superficial level, and maybe it's enough to get people interested, which is in part why I'm making this video, you can say, oh, there's something kind of proto-communistic in Plato, and there's also something kind of proto-fascistic in Plato, and how do we square the circle there and try to understand how can you be the source of both of those kinds of ideological tendencies? But really what that allows us to do is to get deeper into just understanding Plato. And in order to do that, we may have to abandon our, by now, natural inclination, because it's become second nature, to talk in terms of communism, fascism, liberalism, to talk in terms of a concern for race and gender as being the most important categories like they are for some people on the left. And it just allows us to see what, according to Plato, is the basic issue. What, according to Plato, are the limits of a political community? What is Plato trying to teach us in a work like The Republic? Not to mention the others. So that's what I would say about that. If you're somebody who has thought of Plato as a communist, I'd love to hear from you. If you're someone who sees him as a fascist, I'd love to hear from you. How did you guys come across those opinions? And for anybody who's watching this or listening to it, I strongly recommend you use whatever thoughts you have about all of that as an excuse to go read or reread The Republic and just try to get into Plato's world, onto his wavelength, and learn from him about the nature of political life, human life, the gods, and the good. So I'm Michael Millerman, millermanschool.com. Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, comment. See you in the next video.